everyone, and welcome back to Story Deep Dive. This is Rachel and Dana, and we have a new month kicking off. So we've got a new novel for you guys that we're going to discuss over the next 4 weeks. So we're really, really excited to jump in and talk about it. But before we get there, Dana, what do you got going on over there in Danger Tales land?
Well, other than, listen, y'all, Dana's trying to get her whole entire life in order. I don't know how it's going some days, but it's been a really great kind of kick off to the year because we have our huge family just week of celebrations. We call it our Power Week. We got 3 birthdays, an anniversary. It's a whole bunch of cake and a whole lot of food. And after you get over the food coma, you get back to work. And so we've just been rolling. Our updated mentorship program is kicked off, which has me recording a lot of stuff because we're re-recording content, which is always so much fun to think about, like where the content started, and even the structure is the same. Just having students go through it and having their books out in the world and seeing what went well and how we can improve is always exciting. And so right now, I think I'm just doing. That's it. I'm just show up, do it. That's it.
That's like the Dana specialty.
Girl, listen, I don't know. I think it is. Listen, I just look at the checklist. I don't look beyond what's next. That's it. And have a really great time and just be in the moment as people experience something for the first time, even though you've experienced it a lot. So, and so that's always good. So what about you? You're in a whole new year, got a whole new swag going on over there. What's going on at Story Cypher?
Well, mine is the fact that I finally learned how to use lip liner, which I've told you. That's not Story Cypher stuff. That's just Rachel as a person growing.
Priorities.
Yeah, so now that we're past the holidays and we're getting into the new year, I'm kind of still in that place of like looking forward into 2025 and developing, like kind of putting in place like the structures and systems that are going to make 2025 whatever it is that I want 2025 to be. So a lot of that for me right now, I love so much that you are like living in the moment. I look at what's on the calendar. We're in it and we're doing it because you know me. Before an idea ever launches, I have thought of 50 contingencies. I have thought about everything that can go wrong 6 months down the road, or rather than like, how do I get it done today? It's just so I am kind of in that place of toggling, looking forward and looking now. And one of the things that I really like to look for is like, where are the gaps in resources for crime and fantasy writers? Whether that's course material, whether that's workbooks, I'm always looking to fill in those places where I see that my clients, either before they came to me or when I'm trying to like find additional resources that I can send them, where I'm finding, gaps of stuff that's like, oh, there's not anything about this specific thing or that talks about, this thing in this way. So that's early in the year, the process that I kind of go through is like reevaluating, okay, what resources did I make? What resources do I have available? And then what else is kind of missing to fill out the whole? So we're very early in that process right now, being the beginning of the year, but that's a really fun thing to do because I love troubleshooting, I love problem solving, and I love a good workbook. So
listen, who doesn't love a good workbook? And that also makes me think about how we didn't even mention, but the fact that this podcast is now available. So we are posting it. Like, yes, we're recording now, but the fact that people like starting something new is always exciting and nervous. And it's like, we like it. Do we sound corny? Are we laughing too much? But at the same time, like, I think our book selections and the conversations and being able to go back and listen to the conversations that we've had, especially because the books that we're talking about are books that we individually encounter a lot. And so yeah, that has been another cool thing too. You are workbooking it up, girl. Workbook this too. Shoot.
Yes, man. Oh my gosh, listen, I was literally today I was editing our previous episode of the podcast. And this has happened each time I've been editing and I'm just like, "Oh, oh, this is so good." So here's hoping that everybody else thinks so too.
That you don't think you're cool and they're like, you are not. It's all good. It's all good. It doesn't matter. I don't care what nobody says. I like you, Rachel. You know I love you. You are.
That's right. Thank you, Anna. I'm having a great time. So it would behoove you to rock with us as yes light.
You know, that's how we roll. That is how we roll. Oh my gosh. So then, like, let's go ahead and dive into this is like our next book. I mean, technically, it's y'all, we record these out of order. So if we ever are fucking in a loop, but yeah, so yeah, let's like dive in. I'm excited about this conversation today. You know I am.
Yes. Oh my, I'm so excited because all right, so our book pick is of course the things we never got over, which you guys have heard the intro episode, so you know that now. And this is Dana, this is one of your picks, and this is your area. And also this book is like this book is to you what Ninth House is to me in terms of like the number of times that you've read it, taught on it, talked about it. Like, so I've read this book, like I would say 1.5 times. Because I count any speed reads that I do as like a half read. Versus Ninth House, I read, 5 or 6 times. And so we're in these opposite positions. So tell me a little bit about this in terms of, right, we're looking at the plot specifically this week. So tell me a little bit about the way you look at the plot for a book like this. What are the kind of like structures and frameworks that we're working within this week?
First of all, you should ask me that question in advance. However, I will say this. One of the great things about romance, and it's also one of those critiques that people have of romance, is that romance is formulaic. And I don't say that in a bad way. It's actually one of the reasons why readers enjoy it so much. It's the ability to have a sense of nostalgia. And when you pick up a book that you love, I mean, you knowing that in the end, they're going to have a happily ever after. And at the beginning, they hate each other. Your mind is thinking, how is she going to work this out? And you are here for it. And so when you're going into this and you're reading, I think, how you read it as a reader, you listen, you kick back, put your feet up because this baby's a thumper. But as a writer who is reading, after you've had the thumper moment, is to really think about how well Lucy Score baby, she showed out with this book in this series. We literally read this book in our Danger Tales book club. We read the entire series so we could talk about series creation. And I really believe whether you are a romance writer, cozy mystery, whether you're someone that wants to look at slow burn, if you want to look at small town dynamics, if you want to look at a story that is layered in all the right ways, this is the story that can do it for you. And there's some drawbacks to it based on some of those same exact things that I said. But I think the reason why, I know the reason why I love it, because it's just an enjoyable read. And by the time you're in it, you just totally forget, the fact that it's over 600 pages and you want to live and knock them out. You want to be an honorary member and you want to see Knox and Naomi have their happily ever after. And as a writer, listen, one day I'm going to be able to meet Lucy Score because in my head, we are best friends. You know what I'm saying? Like, not best friends like you and I, but my girlfriend in my head. And I'm going to be able to ask all the questions that I have about this. But I think ultimately it's almost like the pinnacle of what any writer, especially if you are independently published, would want to achieve with a book and a series. Right. And it's not because of it doesn't even have to be because of the things that I just said, but it's about having that effect on readers. And so, yes, all of that and then some. As you can see, this is my jam. And I'm not even really a small town person like that. This this is one of those books that made me just all over it because I think she just did that so well, which we'll talk about a little bit more in characters. But yeah, that's like the beginning. It's the beginning, middle, and end of it. But yes, that's why. And I did. Let me just give the short overview. Um, y'all, I was everywhere with this, me and ChatGPT, but here we go. Things We Never Got Over by Lucy Score follows Naomi Witt, a runaway bride who escapes to the small town of Knockemout, Virginia, only to be stranded by her estranged twin sister, Tina, with no money, no car, and the unexpected responsibility of her surprise niece, 11-year-old Waylay is her name. Naomi is forced to rebuild her life from scratch. Her determination clashes with Knox Morgan, the grumpy yet protective local who reluctantly steps into her life. The story unfolds as a slow burn romance intertwined with personal growth and escalating external conflicts. Naomi navigates her fraught relationship with Tina. Knox confronts his own emotional trauma, and a dangerous threat from Tina's past looms over them all. With layered subplots and a blend of humor, heart, and suspense, this small-town romance captivates readers and is a must-read for writers looking to master emotionally resonant storytelling that stays with readers long after the end. I think I did my Rachel on that.
I've literally read it and I'm like, I gotta read this book. Like, I'm just, oh my God. Okay, so I want to ask you about, so let me start by just saying that something, and you kind of started touching on this, something that's so amazing about the plot of this book is that I love it as the book that we did right after Ninth House, because it's such a great example of another book that uses the external conflict to challenge the transformation of the protagonist, but in a totally different way, in a much lower kind of overall, like lower conflict story, and layering in these kind of multiple subplots. So we saw a different version of sort of subplots at work and layering in Ninth House, but Lucy Score does it really well in this book as well, where we have kind of Naomi's life. We have, Naomi trying to build her life, her relationship with Waylay, her relationship with Knox, the kind of more overarching story that we get that will kind of, some of it will kind of continue throughout all three Knockemout books. And so there's so many layers to what's going on. And the way that you've talked about this in the past, you've called it a genre sandwich. So can you talk a little bit about the genre sandwich of romance?
I wouldn't say of romance, but I would say of this book. There's so many things that she does. So like a couple of things other than the fancy summary, is that this is book one of the Knockemout series. And that's important because she does have an overarching arc that goes from the beginning of the book one all the way to book three. She does an amazing job. Lucy Score does an amazing job of they can still be read as standalones, but you get more when you read them in order. But this book to me, I call it a sandwich mainly because if you look at the series, she almost progressively gets a little darker in the content. We don't go to Ninth House dark, but we do move quickly out of the realm of like this almost cozy romance, slow burn when we get into two. It sort of changes almost immediately. And so what I believe she does really well is plants the reader into this moment, into this town, so that you fall in love enough to be curious. Like to be curious about what's going to happen to the other people. And she does that not just by layering those subplots, because both Naomi and Knox go on a journey. But what she does, like if you go back and look at that chapter one, boy, oh boy, does she plant you squarely in the secrets that are already there. Curiosity about why did Naomi run in the first place? Like she still has the updo from her wedding that did not happen. which is why he ends up calling her Daisy. And then the strained relationship that she has with her twin to the point of it causing her conflict. Page 1. I mean, it's like every opportunity that she can to dig us in a little deeper, to put us more securely on that hook. Lucy Score does it. And so you get slow burn, you still get the steam, because they are attracted to each other immediately. Like, not even immediately, it's immediately. It's like right on. And it's like, listen, I just love some Knox. I love some Knox. And so, and what I love, so she has small town. You have the town itself as its own dynamic and character. You have Naomi's life. You have Knox's life, and his dynamic with his sibling and his family, and even his, at odds about winning the lottery. I mean, she plays with so many dynamics that are common in romance, but she does a really good job. I wouldn't per se say she turns them on their head, but she does them in a way that makes you go, like the fact that he's a barber. Like, okay, this big burly red. Okay, he does hair. Okay. I mean, nothing wrong with it. But it's just things like that that make you, sort of stand up, and pay attention. And there's so many moments of like leaning in to the story because she manages to make Naomi this. She's independent, but at the same time, she isn't. And you can almost feel like question her agency. But at the same time, she's like kicking and screaming the whole way to sort of plant her feet. So even in those dynamics, it's a great demonstration of opposites attract, a great demonstration of grumpy sunshine. I mean, it is a trope. Like, she just tropes on this story. It's just tropes. And it just shows why tropes are so important in romance. So I think I answered your question. It's a mashup. And I think what she did as an overarching plot or an overarching brush is she managed to sort of place 3 different books in the same series that in a lot of ways in romance would have been in separate genres. And you normally wouldn't do that. But I would like to, this will be one of the questions I'd asked her, but I would like to believe she did it intentionally because it did progressively get a little darker. And it was necessary. None of it felt gratuitous or just to do for shock value. It really was about where each of the main characters were. And again, it was this extension of being a part of this environment and with these characters that you wanted to see them find their happily ever after. But some of them, I mean, the costs were just greater for some than others because of what they had to overcome to accept that love in their lives.
So it's almost like the conflict in book 1, like the conflict has to be at the level that it does in book 1 because of the way that she chose to like progress it, right? But she introduces us to it's sort of like an action plot, like this kind of overarching like action or suspense plot. I've read book 1 weirdly and book 3, but I haven't read book 2. But we do get this, right? Because the introduction of Tina and Tina's world, it's kind of, just like you said, it's sort of hanging over them. But because Tina's not on the page, what we're seeing most of the plot is Naomi trying to figure her life out and knock him out. So we spend a lot of time with Naomi figuring out her life and then the romance with Knox. And then when Tina, but then the mystery of Tina and where the heck is she and what is she doing? Why does she have my car? There's lots of questions about that. And it's sort of, we get that question at the very beginning of the story, and then it hangs over as kind of this unanswered question until the end. And it works really nicely as sticking that at the end because, to your point, it's going to kind of springboard us into the rest of the books that are going to continue this sort of overarching plot line.
Yes, and it's almost like if you can envision like a domino effect, right? Like Tina was just like, and the immediate thing that we see is Naomi's reaction. But what's under the surface is this continual, the consequences and the conflict that are an overflow of Tina's actions, and that Tina's actions are just a reflection of what Naomi has needed to like rectify in her life. So this is just, thank you, sister, right? That's what this is. But that's what romance does. It's like you're taking a slice out of someone's life, and it's not just any old day. This is when any old day turns into the day when all the stuff hits the fan. Thank you, life, right? And it's like, what are you going to do about it? And at first, Naomi wants to scream into a pillow. That's the solution. And then Knox is like, girl, you need to get it together, which is something that I absolutely love about the dynamic, because even though he gets on her nerves, one of the notes that I wrote in the margin of my book was he doesn't hold her with kid gloves, and he doesn't hold back the punches. And she needs that because she's got to toughen up. And she believes she's toughening up so that she can voice what she wants and finally get what she wants, and not always playing nice for everyone else's feelings, people pleasing. I mean, even in the beginning where she's like, I'm usually nice, but over my coffee, like this you crossed the line, And I'm just like, even from the beginning, right? He's challenging her. And the more he challenges her, the more he sees her and the more she sees him. And that's the dynamic of romance. When we talk about plot, though, it also becomes this sort of conduit of how the more they're at odds, it's almost as if the more they're being drawn to each other. Like it creates this magnetic, energy between them. And that is for them the domino effect that causes them to go on their own personal journeys so that they can get to that end. All the while, in this case, like beneath the surface is the whole Tina thing, right? Because Tina has, first of all, Tina needs to have several seats. You didn't ask me this, but I just think I should go on the record. Listen, Tina needed, I don't know, a clothesline and a throat punch, something.
I never thought I would hear you say the phrase, Tina needed a clothesline and a throat punch.
And a throat punch, because she was doing too much. She was doing all of the things. I was like, if this chick don't find something else to do. But, her just disrupting Naomi's life, but at the same time, it's like, how many times in life do the greatest disruptions bring about the greatest amount of change? And that's what we see here. But that's only because Lucy's score brings it to the page, right? Brings it to the page, her at odds. How does she deal with the no money? How does she deal with the not having a place to go to live? How does she deal with not having a car? And then this niece that she didn't even know existed. And so I feel like in the beginning, it's like, well, dang, like how, like if you do all of this in the first few chapters, what else is going to happen? Everything. She does everything. And so, yeah, I just feel like this is like a masterclass of books. Without having huge stakes, they do get worse, but not having huge stakes. It can even be a great book if you do no steam or sweet romance, because it could be essentially the same, give or take, with lower heat. And so, yeah, I think I answered your question, even though I clotheslined Tina and Yeah. But
It's okay. She had it coming, honestly. Tina had it coming. It's fine.
now, as someone who you like crime stories, and I know that I just told you, I just knew you was gonna like this story. My question to you is that because you are not like an avid romance reader, did you feel like the unfolding of that felt natural? Like, how did you feel about kind of that Tina sort of came in the beginning and sort of it was almost like tagged on the end is what it felt like in the direction that she took it. I'm really curious about that.
Yeah, I think, and this is where, it might be my inexperience with the genre of romance, where I was a little bit like, sorry, what, we have a hero at the mercy of the villain scene now? Why, how did we get here? So it was a little bit, so I had the benefit of having read, again, I read this series all weird and out of order. So I'd read the third one. So I knew the way that like it ends and some of the like overarching conflicts. But it did feel a little bit out of left field for me of like, usually when I'm getting when I get to a story and by the end we're having again, hero at the mercy of the villain scene, I'm expecting that earlier in the story, I saw that like that I'm expecting that there's going to be a confrontation. So I noticed the tonal shift and it threw me a little bit. But I'm wondering, like, how common is it for romance to kind of have that sort of like at the end, we kind of do like a 1-2, and all of a sudden we, kind of feels like we're somewhere else, but not for that long either, right? We had a couple of like scenes where where she was kind of at the end with Tina and facing down the villain. But then, it happens and then it's over. And then we're like, and they lived happily ever after, it's sort of like, oh, all right, then. It felt a little bit like a detour.
I think this is something that how common is it? I don't it's hard to say what is common and what isn't. I would say it's not the norm like this. Sometimes when you see this, it can be one of those moments where a writer says, "Oh, you need a twist. Here, let me throw one at you." And it's like, "Wait, where did that come from?" And I sort of felt like that a little bit when I first read it. But when I see what happens across the series, I think that going there was necessary to accept the fact that the next book gets just a tad bit darker, right? Because usually what happens is that your ultimate conflict is in alignment with your original conflict, right? Like when you get to that climactic point, that there is a sense of not a mirror, but it's just a graduation of the same thing. Here, it kind of wasn't, right? Like, she left her kid, but it doesn't warrant y'all, this will be a little bit of a spoiler alert, but please read it, the kidnapping, right? And we'll just leave it at that. And so that may be a little bit like this, but I think we needed that almost to be a bridge to continue to read. And also because we had the sort of almost like the first domino for the second book with Nash. So to me, it can be, if you were reading this in isolation, it may be like, that's a stretch, right? Just a little bit. But because of what she was entangled in and because she was no stranger to being on the wrong side of the law, even the fact with Nash and even the fact that, Knox was basically being the town's protector, right? Ready to throw Naomi out of town. Like he was cursing and everything. Like he was like, he about to throw her out. I've had my coffee. I don't got my contacts in. Like
Little dots of his contacts. Bless him.
I just was like, that's like crazy. But and I think, but so if you were looking at it in a vacuum in just this one, I think it was a little bit of a stretch. But because of the likes of what she was getting involved in, and because she was always looking for a big score, right? And that sort of comes with that, it causes shady things to happen. And she kept doing a lot of petty crimes, or whatever. And so I think that there's that, and the fact of where you're going with book 2. I think that it just opened it up so that we felt like going to where she goes next and then where she ultimately goes into book 3, it just feels like almost like a natural progression, but that's not normal. Usually, and in essence, when you start off a book, you really are giving your readers a promise of what to expect. And I don't believe that that was the expectation. Um, I do believe because she chose the had that mother daughter sister dynamic kind of at the core, it was an alignment, right? Because she wasn't. I mean, she started off with a crime. She stole. She stole the car. She stole the money. She stole the laptop. She laughed at her wedding dress and she dropped off her kid and she bounced. So on one hand, would I recommend that we all do that? Probably not. Like I think you have to have a lot of foresight to make it all make sense. And I think in the end, it all makes sense. But I do believe that's a head scratcher if you don't read beyond book 1.
Yeah, well, and I think that's something that's really important here is that I think Lucy's score worked so hard to endear us to Knock 'em Out, to endear us to her characters, to take us on a really enjoyable ride through Naomi and Knox and having that, watching their relationship and seeing the way that she delivered on the romance and the sort of, I don't know, almost like the B plot of, Naomi trying to get settled in her life. I think because of that. So then, we get, just like you said, when you read it in isolation, you're kind of like, okay, I guess that's a thing you can do, right? But because she endeared us through the other 80% of the book, right? The previous 80% of the book, I think that she did enough of that work. And she also introduced us to the other, our other series protagonists, right? She planted them in there and she endeared us to them as well. So that even if you were a little bit like, I don't know what to do with this portion of the ending, people showed up and people did show up, right? I mean, this book is huge, as in popular. It's also large, it's long, but the people showed up even after like 550 pages, they showed up for another book with her in this series. And so I think that that's a testament to the work that she put in to the other aspects of the book to hook us for the series and make us want to show up for book 2.
Mm-hmm. I also think that as a brand, I really haven't had a chance to look at like when this was written in her line of books. But I think also as a brand, if you are known to sort of dibble dabble in different things, not too far out the scope, but that your range is a little bit further, then I think the more people trust you as a brand, then they kind of give you creative license to do some other things, trusting in your storytelling ability that this is gonna make sense, right? That is gonna make sense. And I think she does that well because I've read many of her books and she just does a good job. I also think that as a brand, she's been able to sort of navigate in areas where some authors would be just small town, just suspense, and I think the reason why it works more than anything here is because we are sold on the people. So because we're sold on the people, we're in for the journey. And that's where her having this long of a book serves her well. Because we have been in, we didn't had all the drama, we didn't had the drinking, we didn't had the bar fights, we didn't we didn't had all of the things, we didn't had the chillaxing, getting a haircut and getting beautified, like we had all the things. So if this is a part of their journey for them to get to their happily ever after, okay. And we've had the laughs and I think it also makes for a great demonstration of the highs and the lows, right? Because we can read manuscripts and in the beginning, they sort of have this almost like monotoneness, and she goes there. She goes up and she goes down. And it's almost like, dude, did you have to rip out her heart, stomp on it, tap dance on it, do the Millie Wop, whatever all it was. Yes, that's what he said. I was like, no. And so, and so because she gives us the highs and the lows, I think that's just one more layer of us giving her permission to take the story where it needs to go. And I think that's a big part of the trust that readers have between the reader-writer relationship. And she has delivered saying like, I'm trustworthy. And so that's why this can happen. And I think that's why you can have the next one that really talks a lot about depression. And then the next one that is essentially a version of organized crime, right? Like it progressively gets darker in different capacities. And if you think about the layer of darkness here, even though it's sort of masked in family dynamics, it's the darkness that comes with trauma, right? Parental trauma. And Naomi, even though she's had it in her own way with her sister, it doesn't compare to that in which Knox is sort of trying to still see his way clear of. And I think that is another nod to her being able to take the story where it needs to go, because if you think about it that way, it didn't come from out of left field. Right? You see this like, I can see the strings here and the strings there. And the fact that was Liza J, in the beginning, her house was always dark. She didn't open the right? Like people dealing with grief and trauma and in their own way. And it's sort of being masked, if you will, by laughter. But also this determination that even though like my soul is crushed, I'm gonna still do what I need to do. And I think that's what makes people gravitate towards it. Because how many times do you gotta suck it up, buttercup? You gotta suck it up, buttercup, and keep pushing.
Yeah.
And that's what she's doing. And you just having where what is art imitates life. And so that was a long way to answer the question, but I think that's why with that sort of I would say it's a suspense. It wasn't totally out of left field because of Tina sort of just bouncing, and also those few moments of her coming back and stealing things and things like that cause it to sort of bring it back up like, oh wait, she's not just gone. Right. And then again, we see even that get progressively worse, right? Of like how far Lucy Score as an author is willing to put the female protagonist in harm's way, which isn't very common in contemporary romance. Like dark romance, it is common. Contemporary romance, not so much. And so, that she's willing to do that and how far she's willing to take that for transformation.
Yeah, well, and there's a few things I want to kind of just like touch on and reiterate here is that, you're right that in the story, we do get these little, like there are these moments of criminal activity, right? Naomi's house gets broken into, it gets broken into again. There's this sense that someone is looking for something. And we do have kind of Nash reporting on, they are investigating. So something that I think she does well, even though the climactic moment felt a little, we've already talked about how it felt a little bit out of left field. In fairness to Lucy Score, she kept a pulse on that thread. It's not like, and this is where I think the easy mistake would be for a new writer, for a writer trying something different, would be you introduce Tina and then Tina disappears and then we don't really hear anything about it, right? Like not really anything happens with it. And then at the end, it's like, ta-da, we have a plot twist, remember Tina? And that's when it would feel really like that's the kind of thing that for me would make me like throw the book out or if it was my client, I would be very nice about it, but we'd have a talk about it, you know? But Lucy's score, right? We get a pulse on these moments of something is still wrong in the background, even if we can't, but no one can put their finger on it. So stuff keeps getting stolen. Naomi's place keeps getting broken into, and Nash is kind of trying to find out what happened, right? And there's some even like Nash runs into some conflict. And so there are these little things that give you a hint that something is a little bit off. And then, because you're talking about how she goes, you know, she's willing to kind of go there. Even when we get to our sort of hero at the mercy of the villain scene at the end, because you're talking about kind of like masking over with humor, even that scene is a little bit humorous, right? So our antagonist is not very good at being an antagonist. Like he's kind of a dummy, right? And so what's great is because the series is going to get progressively darker, it's going to get a little more, you know, that conflict is going to get darker, it's going to get more serious, those stakes are going to get higher. But this book is just introducing us to that conflict. So she kind of stays tonally in line, even with that scene, with the rest of the book, where there's a lot of like sad or difficult things that she deals with, but she keeps a layer of humor to keep a little bit of lightness to it. So we've been introduced to kind of this sense of life and death stakes that are going to exist within the series, but she's doing it tonally in line with the story that we're in now. So then we can shift into the new story and for the second book, and she can begin to give us cues that it's going to be a little darker. It's going to be a little hard, right? And she's warming us into it with this book.
Yeah, that, and I also think when Nash gets shot.
Okay, so yeah, we're gonna spoil that. I was like, sorry, should I not say anything? And I was like, Nash runs into some conflicts, but it's great. Spoiler alert, you're gonna know some things.
Read the book. Okay, y'all listen.
Just read it. And you'll have fun anyway. Knowing everything that happens, you'll have a great time.
Listen. I think that is where the ha-ha-ha's like, oh, like, wait a minute. Because there is a difference between life and death metaphorically, or life and death, I just won't be able to love you anymore, you know, to, oh my gosh, he's in the hospital.
Literal death, actual death.
And I think part of this, I mean, which could always be just a whole nother conversation of just like this consideration of, you know, I love like creating series of like when you are looking at your series as a whole and you are deciding to take that sort of action, like, are you saying, I want to go here, and so we need to at least do this? And again, I think it was a nod, right? It was a nod to like, yeah, like we're putting jokes on this, but this is really serious because this is a kid that his dad really, you know, he's not the sharpest tool in the toolbox. You know what I'm saying? But, you know, it gets progressively worse. And so I think what that does, one of the things that I love about this is the fact that you sell your next book with your current book. And she sold that book too with this book. And baby, she sold Lucia book dream. Right? Like, and to me, that is one of the most amazing parts about romance. Right. And that's what we are. I believe it's just a part of being a full-time writer in the current state of publishing, but also because it gives readers a whole experience. It's like everything. And so yes, I think having that suspense, it's not a common combination, but suspense isn't just not heard of. And I also feel like the dynamic of the suspense being added where it was needed to almost like lift the problem up beyond what the norm was, because really it was a sort of just like, I don't want to say
like the life
tag, you know, and then just going back and forth, you know what I'm saying? And then get to the steamy bits. Oh, okay. Little chandelier swinging. All right. And then wait, what? You know, and this I was like, let me catch your attention, pay attention. And so I think that it just helps. And ultimately in this book, when you're looking at it as far as the plot is concerned, you really could slice this book in so many ways and still get so much from it. And when you take it in like the totality of it, even though the book seems like it only spans, I would say, a couple of months.
Yeah, it's not a long period of time.
Like, I would like 6 to 8 weeks. And to imagine the fact that she sort of has unpacked and sort of, it's always like, oh my gosh. And then even as I was reading, I was like, wait, this one scene is like covering multiple. So it's just so many things that she does as a writer that makes you feel like challenged and excited. And it makes this book and really easy to be a repeat read, right? Because it just has so much. And you want to see the people here win. And it's not just Knox and Naomi, right? You want to see Waylay win, and you want to see Liza J win, and you want to know more about Sloane and more about Lucian and more about Nash and more about, oh goodness, I'm going to forget her name. Lena, there you go, and Lena. And so she makes you want that, right?
Yeah.
And that's just icing on the cake.
Yeah, well, and I'm super excited for next week's topic when we talk about characters, because I think, so many of my notes, like I was trying to, it happened again where I was like trying to take notes on the plot, and I fell into notes and insights about characters, and I was like, crap, I have to put these in my character week notes because I need to separate them out, because if I talk about it now, I won't have anything to talk about next week. I am sure I will find things. However, but I'm really excited for the character week because she really does kind of throw these different people together and give us these opportunities to get to know the people around Knox and Naomi, to, just like you said, endear them to us so that we're wanting, because we're seeing Knox and Naomi, their lives are intersecting with these other people. And so it's giving Lucy Score the opportunity to endear us, not just to Knox and Naomi, which is great, we need that, but to the people around them. And we really need that for a series, right? And to make us care about Knock 'Em Out, and to make Knock 'Em Out a place we want to spend more time in, right? Those characters are essential to making us fall in love with Knock 'Em Out, because Random Town, Virginia is like just on its own, right? It's like, I mean, as good as any other town, I guess. But when you meet the people, right, of Knock 'Em Out, that's what makes us love Knock 'Em Out. And so, by doing things like Naomi, she lives right in the cottage that is on Liza J's property. And Waylay is her sister's niece, and she's having her first day of school, right? So she's bringing in these conflicts for Naomi to navigate. That's bringing her into contact with other characters who are also trying to make their lives work. Poor Waylay is just a kid whose mom dumped her with her aunt. And this poor girl is, I think she's in middle school, right? Like, she is
like 11.
Life is hard enough being 11. Never mind all the other stuff that Waylay is having to deal with. And Liza J, Naomi brings something to Liza J's life that was kind of missing. But it gives us the opportunity to see Liza J and to see to learn about her history and to get to know her and to watch her kind of come alive again and bring the light back into her home. And again, this is done through plot points that are bringing Naomi into contact with other characters who are actively living their own lives, and Naomi gets to play a little part in that. So we get to know Naomi, we get to learn, love Naomi more, we get to see her trying to help others, and we get a taste for their life, and we care about them. And that is a lot to do in one book. That is a lot of
That's
things
why
to
it's
be
600
juggling.
pages. But listen, because girl, you are tap dancing the character line. She trying to moonwalk over it. Y'all trying to keep on his side. But I think you're absolutely correct. And the way that this intersects so much with plot is because of subplots, right? And a lot of times, the question that clients have is a question of like, well, what do we do with subplots? And it's like, well, what do you have going on? And it really can be this very organic overflow from between the plot and characters, and essentially like treating people and characters in your story like people. Like my example to clients is always, just because I'm sitting here talking to you, it doesn't stop me from being a mom, a wife, a puppy mom, a friend. Like, it doesn't stop. All of those things are happening at the same time. So you really want to see them as being whole people who have their own dreams, desires, goals, and whole people. Like when you see Nash and Knox navigating their brotherly relationship and navigating the things that already have Knox and Knox. Knox and Knox.
That was adorable. I love that so much. It's going to stick with me forever. Thank you for that.
I was channeling my inner Naomi where she was like, how many knocks? I was like, so corny and cute. But him, navigating his, like, the whole lottery thing. And the more that we're able to see them as people, that is what helps the subplots to come together, because they have to learn how to navigate that to get to their happily ever after. And I think that we could do a whole nother on just subplots with this, but seeing that, and if you are someone who's a writer who gets, confused about subplots and when do I have them and how many, and Lord help you if you're trying to get a certain number. But when you really think about it, it's like the dynamics between characters birth different things, right? And so we see that. And so we just get an opportunity here to see each of them in Lucy's way of essentially making them all come together to help those characters get to their best possible end in due time. Because they don't get it all at the same time. In due time. And I think the last thing that I will say about that is it's what makes books like this so relatable, because we know, whether people who just lost someone and just couldn't get back to themselves, and a kid or kids or an adult that was a kid that got kind of lost in the sauce because their parents really weren't good parents and they did what they could, even if what they could wasn't enough, and so it feels like I know these people.
Yeah.
And sometimes I just hope it turns out better for her than it did for me, or than it did for, and that's what makes you say, oh, I love them. I love them. I love the characters. I love the story. And not only will I give you my money, because she's got all my money, excuse me, but also that I will give you my time and read the story. And so, but this is an amazing one. I guess the last thing, or not the last thing, but the other thing that I would say for you who's not like romance, you read a lot of them now. How did you feel about the slow burn?
I personally, I love a slow burn. Because a slow burn gives you the opportunity, because I think anyway, the most fun part of any love story, in terms of whether it's a romance or it's a romantic subplot, is the tension between the main characters. And so I love a slow burn because it just drags out that tension. It's my favorite part of a romance. And so that's I thought it worked so well. She did such a great job because what you want in that case, right, is to keep bringing them into contact with each other and bringing them into conflict with each other, right? So the more that they are crossing paths, especially if you're going to be in a slow burn, because you gotta keep the readers reading even when the burn isn't burning so much, when it hasn't, and so taking the opportunities to constantly bring Naomi and Knox across each other's paths and into where they are butting heads with each other, that all of that is fuel for that tension, to increase that attraction, but also to show, and again, this is why we're sort of like starting to verge into character on this kind of point, but also to show how they help each other to grow, how they make each other better. Because I think that, and this, I'm spoiling one of my points for character, but one of the things that I think, can do, and one of the things that's really useful, is to take the ways that they can help each other grow and use that to fuel them butting heads, right? Like the thing that's going to help each other grow is the thing that's going to drive each other crazy at first, because it's the thing that they each need from the other and they haven't integrated yet. And again, that's why I like a slow burn, because it gives you lots of time to do that. And I love it.
Yeah, I always call that they are not what they want, but exactly what they need. And she does such an amazing job of us seeing this from the beginning. Even when Knox was like, she looks complicated. Essentially, she looks highfalutin. She looks like she's just got commitment written on her forehead, like all the things. But he couldn't stay away from her, right? And so yes, I don't want to go into characters. So I will say this to all the writers that are listening, because I know we're about at time. I will say this, that this is an amazing book to look at the plot, the subplots. It is an amazing book to look at for the tropes, whether it's grumpy sunshine, opposites attract, forced proximity, sudden, I called it sudden baby, the secrets, family dynamics, found family, small town, slow burn. Like there's so many different layers to this. And so if you've ever felt like, oh my gosh, like those tropes are so well overdone in romance, it just is. I mean, honestly, in every story, it just is. You just decide how you want to deal with that piece of information. It's a part of it. But I think what this allows you to do is to see how it's not just saying, here's a grumpy sunshine. You know, it's the fact that Knox is still a stinking grump at the end. And that is one of the reasons why I love this book. Love did not take away his grump. That just meant he wants that woman and she is his, okay? He was still grumpy. Love did not cure that, okay? And so I just love that. And how Naomi, even in book 2 and 3, she's still her bubbly self, and he's still his grouchy, grumpy self. It's just so good. It really is. And even and one of the things that we didn't talk about, and I guess it could spill over into characters, is the fact that I believe she wrote these characters well, along with the plot, to show how their nature was exactly what we got and is exactly what the other person needs. Knox's protectiveness wasn't solely towards Naomi and Waylay. Like you can look even from the beginning that he was doing things and guiding her in such a way, her Naomi, to protect Waylay from the beginning. Even just trying to go and handle Tina, who ended up being, like, not Tina, ended up being Naomi, to throw her out of town, was to protect his community. And I just find that so interesting, since a lot of the issues he had with his brother was the fact that he was in law enforcement, right? Which is a form of protection. But the point being that one of the endearing aspects, which we'll get into with characters, is the fact that was in their nature. And we see it through how the plot progresses and how they navigate. So it's just tropes, plots, subplots, in which we'll get to characters, that this is just a great story. Whether you do it in physical, ebook, or audiobook, the audiobook is great too, to just dig into and have a great time.
Yeah, and I just want to add one more takeaway from this book, and I think it's pacing. Pacing specifically when it comes to layering your subplot events. So, just as an example, because we've got lots of stuff, so we're trying to get our life together. We've got work, we've got Waylay, we've got school, we've got Knox, we've got family, right? We've got Tina, like we've got so many things going on. But when we hit those key moments in the story, so if we think of the love story as being the core of the story, right? Like this is the main thrust of the story and realistically what everybody's showing up for. We're wrapping everything else out around it. So when we hit the main moments of our love story, those other subplots are also firing on all cylinders. So since we already spoiled it, right? So Nash gets shot And almost immediately after that, we're right about at midpoint. This is when Naomi and Knox get together. This is when Waylay has her first day of school. And this is when Naomi's parents show up. So everything that happened when things, so it's like we're building and we're building and we're building all these subplots because so for example Waylay's first day of school, this is something we're building up toward for a while because Naomi's trying to figure out what all does she need. She's trying to prepare. She's never done this before. So when those huge moments happen, all the other huge moments are also happening. So you get that, you can feel those major moments and those major shifts in the story, not just because the love story is going somewhere, not because we've just hit a major moment there, but because everything is happening kind of all at the same time. So they're building together, they're exploding together, and they're falling together. And those things are happening in tandem so that we have a nice steady pacing, and it doesn't feel like everything is all over the place where it's like, well, the romance is here, but then, the relationship with Waylay is somewhere over here. And it's like as though it were on its own trajectory. Because if with the number of subplots she's working with, if everything was on like its own trajectory, it would have felt so chaotic. But instead, again, it's like they're happening in line with each other, rising and falling together so that we're getting that even pacing and they all feel interconnected because they're rising and falling together. This one is a really, really good one to look at for that, because if you are managing even just one additional subplot in your story, you need to be aware of that and you need to pace it with the core, with the spine of your story.
That is so true. And I wish I could draw, like in my mind, it's almost like when you see a DNA strand where like the sort of core is what it is, but then there's these elements that kind of feel like they're wrapping around. And this is also when if you're not careful, you can make it so that those other elements like the suspense overrun the romance. And that's not your intention either, right? There's a difference between being a main plot and a subplot. But at the same time, it's vital to the story. And we also know it ups the stakes. I mean, it just does. And so having almost making all of those touch points move in tandem makes it so that it does feel like a smoother experience. It also can be a great way for you to have sort of a checks and balances when it comes to your journey as a writer, right? If those core key moments, is everything sort of working together to either corroborate or conspire, right, against the moment and against where we are in the story. And yeah, I totally agree in that it's done well and it almost feels seamless, but at the same time, it's just like, listen, can she catch a break, please? Can we vote for a break?
And by the way, when you're asking that question for your protagonist, the answer should almost always be no. The answer is no. No, ma'am.
And I hate it for her. I hate it for her. But but we know, it's what helps us to see what they're made of and like that they're going to earn that happily ever after. And that's why we sign up and this is why even though romance is formulated that you don't know when those moments and what those elements are, but bringing those subplots and layering them that way makes it for a very unique experience and a unique reader experience as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I know that we're kind of past time now, but I just wanted to ask you before we go, are there any other takeaways for writers that you want to make sure when it comes to plot that anybody who's read this book should be paying attention to or looking out for?
Great question. I think ultimately, which we'll get into a lot when we talk about characters, but being really clear when it comes to who are the characters or the affected parties that are in your story, because even the town is going through something, right? The town, your main characters, your secondary characters, and all of that affects affects the plot. And your biggest job as a writer is so that it feels almost effortless even though for you, it really a lot of times isn't effortless because you got to make sure that those layers are working. Like, y'all, we are making a cake. You want all them ingredients mixed in. Don't nobody want crunching on no eggshell in their cake. Right?
Please no, please, God help us.
So, I think so part of that, so I think, so it's like understanding, and almost as if you are plotting for each one of those dynamics. And it doesn't have to be a hard plot, but every one of them should have a beginning, middle, and an end. Right. And when the scene goes in the end and, for the ending, in that moment, there should be a sense of peace, a hush falling over the room, over the town. And I think here it could be quick to totally forget that knock 'em out is part of it. The families are part of it, and figuring out where they fall in the spectrum as the story moves forward is just as important in this sense as the main couple because it's a part of their love story. And so there's that. The final thing is, I think in this story, it's great to see that it is a huge collection of tropes, but at no time that the tropes run the story. It made it so that it just felt like that is who they were. We didn't feel like, she called him every way to call him a grump known to men. I stopped counting at like 7 or 8. I was just like, he was the Viking. He was Mr. Grumpity Grump. He was all kind of stuff. And it felt like that's who he was. And the reason why is because she found a way to make all of those natures of him and natures of her to sort of be infused in how they interacted and engage each other through the plot, right? Through the plot, and so not letting those tropes sort of take over, but that they're almost melted, right? Where it's inseparable from the experience that we're having as a reader. And that's when you own them instead of them owning you as a writer. And so, and we just love that. We just love it. Like to be able to do that and be like, okay, I see you. Like she didn't come to play. I just love it. And I think what it'll also do is allow authors to not be afraid or antsy when it comes to tropes, that they really can just be tools that are in your toolbox and that really challenges you creatively to think about them in a different way. And how can I put this together and still make us love them or however, whatever that love is. And the last thing that I will say for sure is when you think about the plot and you think about something that's formulaic, it almost feels like, well, then that means you've seen this before. And in some ways we have, but then in a lot of ways we haven't. That Knox is not a gentleman, right? And I think that's almost unheard of because people don't realize that romance in a lot of ways is old fashioned. Even if it's extra steamy, it really is this thing of chivalry and old time love and courting and swooning and all of this, even if they say it in different ways, hanging from the chandeliers, one night stands, all that stuff. And the fact that she made this big, burly, grouchy guy who was protective of everyone that he loved, who was willing to protect her and a child that he had no familiar ties to or no responsibility to, even if it was just getting her to the station to get her car so he can go back to bed. You're right. He just kept setting these boundaries, but at the same time, never was he something that he wasn't. He wasn't ever even pretending to be a gentleman, not even towards his brother. And I think that just gives you permission to take something that's a norm and sort of challenge it, where he still was our hero. He could be considered a little bit morally gray, but we're not talking about that. He's still very much a hero. He's still very much protective and an alpha man and who loves his woman and who loves his family and that is willing to go at length, even to the lengths of death, to protect them. And and he was still himself. And I think that just gives us sort of permission to say, let's take these elements, even though these are the same elements that we see over and over again, and make them our own, and make them so that it tells this story of this love story in a very unique way. And that's the challenge. And that's also the joy of writing romance.
That's so good. I mean, I feel like I would honestly cut the podcast there because it's such a mic drop. And what I want to do is just cut off the recording and be like, bye guys, nothing, no wrap up. Just that's all she wrote. But that's just such a great note to end on. So I'm really looking forward to talking about characters next week. Dear listener, dear writers, use your plot. Take advantage of your plot to work your tropes, to challenge your characters, to show us what they are made of. And we'll talk more about characters on our next episode next week. And we hope to see you there. And until then, happy writing.